From KUNC and the NPR network, this is In The NoCo. I'm Erin O'Toole. Railroads transformed the American West, and immigrant labor made the railroads possible. But many of those immigrant stories haven't been well documented. Beginning in the late 1800s, railroad companies recruited thousands of Mexican and Mexican-American workers to build and maintain the tracks. These workers were called traqueros. They played a key role in the railroad's expansion well into the mid-20th century, and many of them brought their families with them to Colorado and other parts of the U.S. An exhibit at the Colorado Railroad Museum in Golden highlights the legacy of these workers. To learn more, I spoke with the museum's curator of exhibits, Jasmine Robertson. She told me that although there aren't historical census records to show exactly how many came from Mexico as part of this program, by the early 1900s, Mexican workers made up more than 2/3 of the railway labor force in the U.S. Chinese immigrants did a lot of the work of building American railroads until the government restricted their immigration in the 1880s. Why did the railroad companies look to Mexicans and Mexican Americans as the solution to the labor shortage?
So Mexico's proximity to the United States made it a really convenient pool to pull from, essentially. At the beginning of the 20th century, there was also a lot of political upheaval in Mexico that spurred a lot of immigration of Mexicans into the United States as well, so they had more people to pull from.
And could you talk about what the work was like for traqueros? How grueling was it to keep the railroads running?
So track work is a very labor-intensive type of work. You're lifting really heavy rails and ties. You're dealing with extreme temperature conditions, either really extreme cold or brutal heat. And you're working in these remote locations for really long hours. And if anything goes wrong, if there are injuries, it can take hours for help to arrive.
What's an example of a railroad project in Colorado that traqueros played a key role in?
Up in Sedgwick, Colorado, which is up near Julesburg, the Union Pacific had a 14-mile stretch of track that one of the traqueros we were able to feature in our exhibit maintained. So from Ovid to Crook, Colorado.
Okay, so we're talking about northeastern Colorado near the Nebraska border. Now, the exhibit at the museum shares some personal stories of the workers, including a man named Marciano Aguayo, who settled in Sedgwick County and worked on that line. Could you share a little bit of his story? How did he make his way to Colorado, and how typical was his story for the way that companies recruited workers from Mexico?
So Marciano Aguayo was born in a rural area of Aguascalientes, Mexico in 1897. At 15 years old, he moved into the city of Aguascalientes and began working at a railroad foundry, creating parts for locomotives with his brother. During the Mexican Revolution, he made his way north into the United States. He actually had to pose as a widow's husband so he wouldn't be turned away at the border.
Oh, wow.
By 1921, he settled in Sedgwick, Colorado, where first he labored in sugar beet fields. He met and married his wife, Jovita, and then raised a family. In 1941, he took a job working for the Union Pacific and maintained that 14-mile stretch we were talking about. He had a 32-year career with the Union Pacific. So though many traqueros were brought in by specific railroad companies to work for them, that was not the case for Marciano, but his story was not unheard of.
We know that the traqueros, in many cases, were promised good wages and housing. Did those promises hold up once they got to the U.S.?
For the most part, the traqueros were paid $1 a day in the U.S. for the track work. For the sake of comparison, they were making 25 cents a day in Mexico, so it was better than there. But the Irish immigrants who built the eastern half of the Transcontinental Railroad were making $3 a day. So they weren't getting paid as much as they could be, but it was better.
Okay, the wages were a little less than they could have been making. What about housing?
Yeah, so housing was provided, often in these boxcars that were taken off the track. Priority housing was given to the families who came over, the Tracketto families. So single Tracketto workers were living in these boxcars, but they had like many men crammed into them. So it was not ideal. But in all cases, the housing was really hot or really cold and small and cramped. But they did create those communities, especially the Tracketto women were able to create communities with like what they were provided.
So I didn't know about this until we talked before the show. Traqueros played a key role in supplying railroad labor during World War II, when a lot of men went off to fight in the war. They were brought in under the Bracero program, which brought in millions of workers from Mexico, mainly to help fill a shortage of farm workers at the time, right?
Yes, that's what we know it more as. And that program lasted, like the agricultural specific one, up through the 1960s. But there was a railroad specific one that I had no idea about that was utilized from 1942 through 1945. Over the course of the program, over 136,000 braceros worked for railroads across 35 states.
And I was reading that some of the railroads tried to keep that going because it was kind of popular. How did that go?
It didn't. Unfortunately, the federal government said, no, the program's done. You can't keep your laborers. But they were really valued and valuable.
Well, immigration and immigrant labor are certainly political lightning rods now as much as they've ever been. Jasmine, how did working on this exhibit influence how you think about immigration in 2026?
I have always known that America is a country built on immigrant labor. And the railroad specifically, you see just so many different groups of immigrants with the Chinese, the Irish. But actually getting to dive into the Mexican and Mexican-American work, you just see how vital this work was and how the railroads and the country itself would not have been successful without this immigrant labor.
Jasmine Robertson, curator of exhibits at the Colorado Railroad Museum in Golden, spoke with me about the legacy of Mexican and Mexican-American track workers who were an essential part of the railroad's expansion across the West. The exhibit, Traqueros, Mexican Track Workers and the American Railroad, is open through the end of this month. We'll have links where you can learn more in the show notes and at KUNC.org. And a quick reminder for fans of the show, In The NoCo is hosting a live event later this month in Estes Park. I'll be interviewing Melissa Strong about her new memoir, Climbing Through. Melissa is a writer, a restaurant owner, and an accomplished rock climber. But a random accident left her hands badly damaged and threatened everything she'd been working toward. In her book, she shares the powerful story of how she was able to move beyond the accident, drawing upon the toughness and courage she learned from climbing. You're invited to join us for this live episode taping Tuesday, August 25th at 6:30 p.m. at the Historic Park Theater in Estes Park. Find details and get tickets at KUNC.org on the events page. That's it today for In The NoCo. I'm Erin O'Toole. Thanks so much for listening.